Welcome to our Sunday service, May 4th. Obviously, as we said, this is the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity. It was founded in 1954, and that's an important time. That was founded in Korea in 1954 at the end of, right after the end of the Korean Civil War between the communist forces in the north and the Christian democratic forces in the south. So, what Reverend Moon experienced during that time, and that was just after World War II. World War II ended in 1945, and Koreans suffered a lot during World War II. And before that, for 40 years, Korea had been annexed by Japan, and they had been persecuted a lot. So when Reverend Moon founded this church, he believed there's all these Christians, 2.2 billion Christians. If Christianity could only be united, then they could unite and stop all the wars in the world. If Catholics and Protestants and all the Christian countries, the major Christian countries, the Anglicans, all reunited as one group and decided we're going to end famine, or we're going to create new, or whatever they wanted to do, then they had the wealth, the power, and political capability to do whatever they wanted to do. But unfortunately, they remained disunited at disparate points politically and socially, and so there's no unity of Christianity that we see today. Very little bits, right? And that's what Reverend Moon saw when he made this big name for this little church. So last week you heard from Reverend Robert Enyart, right? Did you guys like that service? I'm sorry I wasn't here. Obviously, I was at the National Council meeting in Las Vegas for our church. And maybe you can hear some of that report if you come to the steering committee meeting. But anyway, I heard Reverend Robert did a great job. Why don't we have a round of applause and just thank him for fulfilling that responsibility. Thank you. Robert Enyart. What else? Okay, here's something I believe in. There's no such thing as a perfect painting, right? There's no perfect painting that this is the painting that ends all painting. There's a perfect song or the perfect family. They aren't perfect, right? But that doesn't stop painters from trying to make the perfect painting or songwriters from trying to write the perfect song, nor does it stop our families from trying to reach the ideal. We shouldn't stop just because we haven't gotten there yet. That doesn't mean we just give up and die, right? It means we keep trying to figure out how to get to the ideal no matter what. Just like painters are still trying to create new art, songwriters are still trying to make a top 40 album. However, we do grow, and hopefully, and this is always our hope, that through the trials and tribulations of our lives, we get closer and closer to the ideal for which we all seek in our hearts. Isn't that so? Isn't everybody trying to be happy? Yeah, that's an easy one, right? So let's try and draw a picture of the ideal through the divine principle. What I've been doing recently for my life of faith is I've been rereading the 1973 version of the divine principle. My wife knows I go out for a walk in the morning and I reread the divine principle. I don't know how many times I read it so far, but a few times. So it's been giving me a lot of inspiration. So let's look at the ideal through divine principle sunglasses or eyeglasses, right? So the divine principle, the first line of divine principle explains, everyone, without exception, is struggling to find happiness. Right? Wrong? Some of you guys gave up, right? Forget it. I'll never find happiness. It's over. Gosh. Tough crowd today. Anyhow, everybody, whether you admit it or not, whether you raise your hand or not, whether you say anything or not, or even if you don't ever respond, I know it's true. Everyone struggles to find happiness. The big question is, why do we have to struggle to find happiness? Why doesn't just happiness fly down and land in our lap? Why is happiness such a difficult thing to attain for human beings? So we're going to look at that a little bit today. So then divine principle says, how can happiness be attained? Divine principle says every person feels happy when his or her desire is fulfilled. Does that make sense? Only a little bit does it make sense, because some people's desire, when they fulfill their desires, by the way, it makes them really unhappy. Isn't that true? Guy desires to rob a bank, goes in with a note, and he says, "Give me all your money, or I'm going to kill you." And then he succeeds in robbing the bank, and then he realizes later on, oh, he scribbled his banknote on the back of his telephone bill. The police got him, and now he's in jail for 7 years for bank robbery. That's a true story, by the way. Police easily caught him. Right? It's in Reader's Digest on goofy crimes. You can read it yourself. Anyhow, he wrote his bank-threatening note on the back of his telephone bill, so the police found it and thought, I bet he lives here. They were absolutely right. So anyhow, sometimes some desires fulfilled make us really happy. Some desires fulfilled make us go to prison, where you're very unhappy, actually. Most people are unhappy. Do you guys recognize this? Bob Millar, what's this? Do you know? This is Abraham Maslow's self-actualization pyramid of happiness. Right? He said there are hierarchies of needs that we have to fulfill in order to become happy. Right? He said so you see this big pyramid, right? He says the basic needs are physiological needs. You have to have food, you have to have water, you have to be warm. Right? Or you can't really be happy. Then you have to have safety, and you have to feel secure and have shelter, or you won't really be happy. And then if you have those things, you have to feel like you belong. You have to have a friends, family, and community, or you won't be happy. And then you have to have self-esteem. Right? Where do we get self-esteem from? Yeah, from yourself. Right? Self-esteem comes from yourself. You have to accomplish things and feel, yes, I'm capable. I'm proud of what I can do. I have a skill level, or I'm good, or I'm kind. I might not be very competent, but I'm very nice to people. Then you can have self-esteem. I'm really nice. Not very bright, but I am very nice. The idea, of course, is that you're bright and you're nice, too. Anyhow, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But then finally he says self-actualization is the key to true happiness. You have to become self-actualized, and I'll explain to you what that means here in a second. So he was a humanist. Abraham Maslow was a humanist psychologist. And he got tired of Freudian psychology and other psychologies that studied why people are messed up. Right? He got tired of studying crazy, broken people and seeing what diseases, mental diseases they have. He said, no, I'm going to study smart people and figure out what does it take to make the highest human potential. For example, he studied Albert Einstein, Jane Addams, Eleanor Roosevelt, Frederick Douglass, people who made significant differences and were successful intellectually, externally, socially. He wanted to see what is it makes Albert Einstein be a genius and help mankind. That's what he was studying. So then, based on studying those amazingly successful people, this is his second chart. The first chart was the first chart. Then he came up with a second chart later. This is second chart. And on the second chart, it's a little more complete. Like you need to breathe. He put breathing here first. First thing you need to do to be happy, breathe. Right? Asian people teach that, by the way. Asian martial arts, Taoism teaches that. Yoga teaches that. Kundalini Yoga focuses on breathing, all those things in Asia. Then you have to have food, water, sex he puts down here as a physiological need, but then he puts it up here too as a family. See? Sleep, you got to have to sleep sometime or you're not going to be happy. You have to go to the bathroom every once in a while or you're not going to be happy. Then next, security of body, same things, friendship, family, self-esteem. But then, after studying these people, this is a more refined chart. He says at the top of this list is morality. He says at the top of this list, if you don't live a moral life, even if you have all these other kinds of things, you can't be happy. So this is just a humanist studying human beings. For example, he studied Frederick Douglass, who fought against slavery. He studied Albert Einstein, who fought for an end to war and things like that, and realized morality is at the top of the list. You must become a moral person to become happy. Right? So, for example, if you don't have air, you're going to live in a very uncomfortable 4 more minutes. Right? It usually takes about 4 minutes. Some guys can extend that by practice, but usually after 4 minutes, you're unconscious, right? So you got to have air. You can say without air, you really wouldn't be happy, would you? Even if you had a nice dinner waiting for you, and without air, you're going to be unhappy. How about water? Usually without water, we can last about 3 to 4 days without water. Some guys go 7, and then they die, but nobody can go very long without water, right? So if you didn't have water, even though you had lots of air, you'd still probably be unhappy. After like the 3rd or 4th day, you'd be very uncomfortable. How about food? Human body can usually last approximately 72 days. Some people die at 60 days, some people at 80, but approximately 72 days, they say you can last without eating any food, right? Then you need security. You need safety. Well, what we say in divine principle terms, if you have all the air you want, all the water you need to drink, all the food, and you're safe, but you're living in a prison cell, you're still unhappy, aren't you? You still, doggone it, gosh. Safe, I'm safe here in my cell, nobody can get me. Even the IRS can't touch me in a prison cell, but nevertheless, I'm still really unhappy about life, right? Why? Because Maslow said we need other things. You need to have friendship, and you need to have family. You don't just need to have family. Your family has to like you, right? What if you're in a family and everybody hates you, right? Then, yeah, sorry. If you're in a family and you think everybody hates you, you're still not happy. You need to have friendship in your family, and we have to get to the point where divine principle explains we have to have love. So if you have all these things, food, water, safety, but you don't have love, you're still not going to be happy, are you? Right? You have to have self-esteem. Even if you're in a friendship and everybody loves you, but you're totally incompetent, you won't have self-esteem and you're not going to be happy, right? You have to have self-esteem. I can do something. I can do something for the sake of my family. Even if it's a little thing, I can do something for my family. And that gives you self-esteem. Then you feel I'm a necessary part of my family or my church or my society, my job, my work, or my whatever I do. I'm raising a family. All those things bring me happiness because I gain esteem, self-esteem from that. Even if everybody else thinks you're a moron. If you have self-esteem, if you know you're not, if you know you're working to save somebody else's life or take care of somebody, you can have self-esteem. Even if everybody else thinks the color of your skin or the nation you come from or whatever makes you, even if you're a gypsy, for example, or Italian, then if you have self-esteem, just kidding, Italians, I'm part Italian, don't worry. If you have self-esteem, you can be okay. And this is the nature of the saints, right? When the whole world hated Jesus, he knew himself he's the Son of God. It couldn't affect his self-esteem. Even though socially he was an outcast, same with the saints, Peter, Paul, James, John, Matthew, Thomas. Even though they were socially outcast, they had tremendous self-esteem. They knew they were blessed by Jesus Christ, right? They knew. So that self-esteem made a difference for them. And then we have to have some kind of stimulation and some kind of accomplishment and creativity, and then morality is the key feature. If we're immoral in our life, even if you have food, water, friendship, etc., if you're immoral, finally some unhappiness comes to your life. So morality is essential and incredibly valuable and precious in our life. And this is by Abraham Maslow, who is humanistic, right? And here you can see his this is a second, third, or fourth list, and he gets a little bit more complete. And then, of course, still morality is way up at the top, right? So this is what he meant by self-actualization. He says, what a man can be, he must be. So he's studying geniuses like Einstein. Einstein had to invent. If you read Alexander Bell's biography, for example, Alexander Graham Bell says, I'm an inventor. I have to invent. Birds have to fly. Fish have to swim. I have to invent. He invented the telephone and many other kinds of things. right? This quotation forms the basis of the perceived need for self-actualization. This level of need refers to what a person's full potential is and the realization of that potential. So Abraham Maslow felt that normal, healthy people have to be moral, want to be giving, want to be appreciated for the giving. Maslow describes this level as a desire to accomplish everything that one can to become the most that one can be. Individuals may perceive or focus on this need very specifically. For example, one individual may have a strong desire to become an ideal or perfect parent. Like Mother's Day is coming up next week, right? We should honor our mothers who just wanted to become an ideal or perfect parent. And another desire may be expressed athletically. For others, it may be expressed in paintings, pictures, or inventions. As previously mentioned, Maslow believed that to understand this level of need, the person must not only achieve the previous needs, but he has to become a master. He has to become a master of your physiological needs, right? We don't say master in divine principle. What's the word we use? Owner. Amen. Thank you very much. We become the owners of our body, right? We own our body. We master our body. So you can see all this stuff again. Okay, let's see. Later in life, but this is where it breaks down. Maslow was a humanist, which means he doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in angels, doesn't believe in good nature or fallen nature, doesn't believe in heaven, doesn't believe in hell. He was a humanist, right? And later in life, he came with a question. He said, why don't more people self-actualize if their basic needs are met? He met lots of people who have all the water they want, all the food, but they don't try to go anywhere. They just watch television. They just do whatever they do, right? They don't try to self-actualize. He couldn't figure out why not. How can humanistically, and this is very important, as a humanist, again, a humanist doesn't believe in God, fallen nature, devils, or angels. How can we humanistically understand the problem of evil? And the realization is you can't explain it humanistically, right? Animals aren't evil. Animals live in the world and do what they need to do, but they don't genocidally wipe out 6 million Christians in World War II. They don't genocidally kill a certain race of people because of the color of their skin. Animals don't do that. Just humans. Well, how do we explain evil from a humanistic point of view? And the answer is you can't. It doesn't make any sense from a humanistic point of view. That's why Reverend Moon taught us you have to go to a source higher than just humanism. You have to understand religion and the meaning of our spiritual life. Humanism is a philosophical and ethical stance that emphasizes the value and agency of human beings. Now, humanism believes in fulfilling our true human potential. That's a very good thing. And there's many great humanists who are scientists, who work hard, don't believe in God, but still somehow believe that morally they have to live for the sake of others. We call them in divine principle conscientious people. And we respect conscientious people who don't have the gift of faith. It's okay. We love them. We believe there's a place in heaven for conscientious people who don't have the gift of faith, right? And individually, collectively, generally prefers critical thinking evidence, that is rationalism and empiricism, over established doctrine or faith. The meaning of, they would rather have science than faith. The meaning of the term humanism has fluctuated according to the successive intellectual movements which have identified with it. Generally, however, humanism refers to a perspective that affirms some notion of human nature. In modern times, humanist movements are typically aligned with secularism and with non-theistic religions. Does that make sense? This is from Wikipedia, by the way. Non-theistic religions. All right, there's non-theistic religions. Anyway, that's not the topic of our sermon today, but I want to give you some idea how humanism looks at life. Here's another look at life. How many people see an old lady with a big nose? John Kenny does, Calvin does, Jarrell does. How many see a pretty young lady with a choker around her neck? The other half of the group. And actually, some people see both. God bless you, right? Some people can only see the pretty lady, and some people can only see the big nose lady. Anybody who can't see the pretty lady? Anybody who can't see the big nose? You can't. Okay, good. It's all right. You can be honest. It is a trick. It's called an illusion. You can figure it out later. How about this one? How many people see the rabbit? How many people see the rabbit? You see a rabbit? How many people see the duck? You can see them both. So this one's too easy, right? That one's too easy. Everybody sees the rabbit and they see the duck. No one was tricked by that one? Oh, so if I had said duck first, you would have been completely confused. This is an important point to divine principle. Yeah, an illusion is designed to be a trick. It could be a rabbit. Here's a rabbit's eye and the rabbit's nose and rabbit's ears. Or it could be a duck with here's a duck's bill and his eye and the back of his head. Right? Here's another illusion. What do you guys see? Who sees what? What's that? Some people see the saxophone player, right? How many people see a pretty lady? How many people can't see the saxophone player? Everyone sees it? Okay, a couple guys over there. Okay. You see a guy with a beard? I don't see a guy with a beard. Some people see Che Guevara. Now, that's one I didn't get. That's one I didn't get. How about this one? See, this is a beautiful illusion, isn't it? Isn't that beautiful? These guys draw this flat, but it makes it look like these kids are riding on a flying carpet. It's just a beautiful illusion. Now, illusions work, and we understand illusions because we can see from various points of view. Not everybody can see from various points of view. Some people can only see the rabbit. Some people can only see the ugly lady with a big nose. I shouldn't say ugly, just the old lady with a big nose. How about that? Some people can only see the saxophone player or the pretty. It all depends on your point of view, doesn't it? So we're going to discuss happiness from a different point of view than humanists look at happiness. Okay, we're going to start with Sir Isaac Newton. And you guys understand the universal law of gravitation, right? Well, you know, for most of human history, people couldn't see the universal law of gravitation. That's just history, right? Nobody knew. Nobody understood it. And then the story goes, Isaac Newton was sitting under an apple tree thinking, and an apple tree fell. Actually, in the story, it falls on his head, bumps him on the head, and then he begins to think about what accelerates the apple. He thinks, there must be an invisible force that accelerates the apple, right? Because he had already written his 3 laws of motion. Everything remains at rest. Everything at rest remains at rest unless an external force makes whatever's resting now not rest, right? Okay. Says probably the more correct version of the story is that Newton, upon observing an apple fall from a tree, began to think along the following lines. The apple is accelerated. Since its velocity changes from 0 as it is hanging on a tree and moves toward the ground, thus by Newton's second law, there must be a force that acts on the apple to cause it to accelerate. Let's call this force gravity, and the associated acceleration, the acceleration due to gravity. Now, you and I, when we see an apple fall or we see a cup fall, we don't think like Newton does, do we? Right? We just think, well, an apple fell down. So what? Apple fell, must be right. I'm hungry. Right? Usually, when we see apples fall, it just makes us think, maybe we can make apple juice out of that. Right? But Newton is a super genius, perhaps the smartest man who ever lived. He says, then imagine the apple tree is twice as high. Now, and this is what Newton thinks. Again, we expect the apple to be accelerated toward the ground. So this suggests that this force that we call gravity reaches to the top of the tallest apple tree or to the tallest mountain. So Newton's thinking, whatever makes that apple accelerate towards the ground functions at the top of trees, at the top of mountains, and up into the top of the skies, right? And begins to have an imagination. He begins to think about cannonballs. Have you guys heard this story? Newton, so here's what he dreamt. He thought of this cannonball. He thought, if I threw an apple, the apple goes in a curve like this, right, and then touches the ground. Then it falls to the ground. Now, this is by studying Galileo's work too. So then he thought, if I had a cannon that can fire a cannonball, after a while the cannonball would, if you had a small cannon like we use now, it would land on the earth. Further it would further, but he thought, if I shoot that cannonball fast enough and far enough, it's actually going to go around the earth and it's going to keep falling. And it's going to fall all around the earth, right? So his super imagination. He says, but as we increase the muzzle velocity for our imaginary cannon, the projectile will travel further and further before returning to Earth. Finally, Newton reasoned that if the cannon projected the cannonball with exactly the right velocity, you know what that velocity is, by the way? You guys have heard this all the time. Whenever they send the space shuttle up, they reach a certain velocity. Remember what that is? 18,000 miles per hour. Newton figured that out. If I could shoot a cannonball 18,000 miles per hour, it would achieve what he called free fall. You know that term? You remember astronauts are in free fall around the Earth? Who invented that term? Isaac Newton invented that term 500 years ago. Right? Such a genius, you can't even imagine. It would travel completely around the Earth, always falling in the gravitational field, but never reaching the Earth, which is curving away at the same rate that the projectile falls. Right? It's very interesting to me. I love this story. I think, who could think like that? Anyhow, so that is, the cannonball would have been put into orbit around the Earth. Newton concluded that the orbit of the moon was exactly the same nature. See, when you and me see apples fall, we think of apple juice, or we think of lunch, or we think of a delicious sweet snack. Newton, when he sees apple falls, comes up with a theory of gravity and understands the positioning of the moon around the Earth. And the moon is no different, that there's an invisible force holding the moon to the Earth called gravity, and it's exactly the same force that holds us to the ground and makes apples fall from trees. Isn't that interesting? And then he began to think and think and think, and he began to write equations, mathematical equations to judge how heavy that moon has to be to travel around the Earth at that time and that distance. And by the way, we still use exactly the same equations that Newton used to figure out how to put satellites into space, or how to travel, or exactly how fast a spaceship has to be to get off the Earth. Right? And then he began to think, it's not only the moon circling around the Earth, but it's the Earth circling around the sun, and it's Mars circling around the sun. And he began to understand not only did he understand that from his simple apple falling out of a tree, that all the planets in the solar system and all the galaxies and all the stars are still ruled by this invisible force called gravity. And then you know what he did? He invented infinitesimal calculus to figure out how to figure out where they are. No one even knew about calculus, so he invented the math to be able to figure out where planets and stars and all those things were, right? Our kids still study it in college, right? And then he figured out all the galaxies, all the planets of the whole universe are governed by this exact same force. Is that interesting? And I know you're probably thinking, yeah, that's interesting, but isn't this church? Why are we talking about physics? And because we're talking about the invisible laws of God. That's why we're talking about it. Do you like GPS? You know, on my phone, when I get lost, I like to use my GPS, and it tells me where to find a restaurant or a customer. You guys like GPS? Sure, everybody loves GPS. If you do, then you should thank Isaac Newton. He's the one who figured out the laws that allowed satellites to go into space and be in geosynchronous orbit around the Earth. That's Newton. Do you guys like using your cell phone where you can call Japan or call your home country? Thank Isaac Newton. He's the one who figured out how to put satellites up in space and keep them up there. He's the genius who did that. Every rocket that leaves the Earth, every satellite in orbit, all space travel follows the invisible laws of gravitation written down by Newton and passed down throughout the ages for human beings to follow. If you like all these things, you have to thank Newton. And you're going to see how this makes sense in a second. You like this picture? That's a picture from the Hubble Space Telescope. Right? You like this picture? Isn't that a beautiful, incredible picture of the galaxies out in outer space? And this is a picture of the space telescope called Hubble. Do you like all those pictures? If you like all those pictures, look at this one. This picture of Saturn, right, by the Space Telescope. So is that one. If you like the Hubble telescope, you have to thank Newton. Do you know why? Because he's the one who invented the reflective focusing mirror that allows us to see into deep space. He invented this 500 years ago. And we still follow Newton's laws of gravitation to the letter. I have many customers, Vanguard, Viasat. They shoot satellites out in space. And I ask the engineers, I ask the engineers this. I would ask them, do you use Einstein's theory of relativity and space-time continuum theory to figure out how to put a satellite in space? They say, heck no. We use Newton's formula still. We still use Newton's formulas, right? Beautiful space. If you like all that stuff, thank Newton. Okay. Now, this is something I do, and I know I'm peculiar. If you go to Popular Science and all these different websites and ask who's the smartest scientist who ever lived, Newton is usually at the top of the list. Here's one top greatest scientist, Newton, then Louis Pasteur, then Galileo, then Marie Curie. And then there's different lists, and they usually have different people. Sometimes Albert Einstein is here, but Isaac Newton is always in the top 3 smartest human beings who ever lived. You'll see why this makes sense in a minute. Here's another one. A ranking of the most influential scientists, past and present. Again, Isaac Newton, who happens to be a minister of the Anglican Church. And you know that? He wasn't just a scientist. He was a minister in the Anglican Church, and he served just like I do here, right? Not as a senior pastor, but he worked here. Albert Einstein was a religious Jewish person. Niels Bohr was a Jewish who converted to Lutheranism. Galileo Galilei was a Catholic monk. Louis Pasteur was a Catholic. Why do I mention these things? Because sometimes you hear in the U.S. government fights, and they say, if Christians get their way like in Oklahoma or Missouri, and they teach creationism and they teach science, then we're going to lose all our scientific progress, and we're going to go back to the Neanderthal age if they teach that God created the world. Well, listen to me. Listen. The top 5 scientists in the world who ever lived, and actually many more than this, all believed in creationism and all believed that God created the world. In fact, we say that Isaac Newton, here's his description from Wikipedia. Newton's conception of the physical world provided the stable model of the natural world that would reinforce stability and harmony in the civic world. Newton saw a monotheistic God as a masterful creator whose existence could not be denied in the face of the grandeur of all creation. Newton held a Christian faith that saw God as a masterful creator whose existence could not be denied in the face of the grandeur of all creation. Here's my point. If the greatest scientist who ever lived, and on all the lists of smartest scientists, he's at the top, can believe in God and creation, why don't we teach that in public school? Does that make sense? I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, but we should be sharp. Divine Principle says, Divine Principle is here to unite science and religion. Not just religion and not just science, but the two are supposed to be working hand in hand to make a better world for us. So this is really important. Now, the reason this is important is because there's other invisible laws, right? Newton saw invisible laws of the universe that guided the galaxies, the planets, the stars, and everything else. Likewise, we believe in the invisible law of love. Just as there are laws that guide planets and stars, there are laws of the universe that will guide us to happiness. And if we break those laws, we're going to be led into unhappiness. Okay? So, for example, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. This is the law of love by Jesus Christ. And it isn't different than the invisible law of gravitation of the universe. Newton could see they're both the same. They're both from the same lawyer. They're the same God who created these various invisible laws. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. St. Paul said, love does no harm to your neighbor. Therefore, love is a fulfillment of the law, because the law is designed so you don't hurt your neighbor. Don't steal, don't lie. All those things are designed to not hurt your neighbor. And that's why love is the greatest law or commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. Here's a speech. I'd like to have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speak here, but unfortunately he's in the spirit world right now. So I wanted to read this speech which sort of unites all these different ideas together, and I thought you might like it. Because, especially recently, there's all this talk, if you're into NBA basketball, all kind of talk and accusations about racism and evil and all these things. I thought, let's go to Martin Luther King Jr. to help solve these problems for us. He was a Baptist minister, civil rights activist, and Reverend Moon called him the greatest American of the last 100 years. So here's a speech he gave in Detroit. He says, I want to deal with one or two of these mighty precious values that we've left behind. That if we're to go forward and to make this a better world, we must rediscover. And this is a speech he gave in Detroit in 1954. He says, the first is this. The first principle of value that we need to rediscover is this, that all reality hinges on a moral foundation. All reality hinges on a moral foundation. You remember how Maslow discovered without morality, you're not really going to be happy in the end anyhow. He says, in other words, that this is a moral universe and that there are moral laws in the universe just as abiding as the physical laws. So he's saying the same thing as Newton said, right? That the physical laws of gravity are immutable and you got to live with them, but there's also moral laws like the law of love. He says, I'm not just so sure we all believe that. We never doubt that there are physical laws of the universe that we must obey, right? We never doubt that, do you? He says, and so we just don't jump out of airplanes or jump off high buildings for the fun of it because we believe in the law of gravity, don't you? We don't do that because we unconsciously know that there's a final law of gravitation, and if you disobey it, you're going to suffer the consequences. We know that, don't we? Everybody knows that. Even if we don't know it in its Newtonian formulation, we know it intuitively, and so we just don't jump off the highest building in Detroit for the fun of it. We don't do that because we know that there is a law of gravitation which is final in the universe. If we disobey it, we'll suffer the consequences. But I'm not so sure we know that there are moral laws just as abiding as a physical law. I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure if we really believe that there is a law of love in this universe, that if you disobey it, you'll suffer the consequences as well. There's a law of love just as immutable as the law of gravitation. So some people think, well, okay, we know what he's addressing is everybody likes these things: food, water, sex, sleep, homeostasis, excretion. These are physiological needs that we have. But he says giving in to the temptations of physical desire. Some people end up giving in to the temptations of physical desires to the point of gluttony, adultery, sloth, and that is immoral. And because it's immoral, we're going to suffer from those various temptations. He says, all I'm trying to say to you is that our world hinges on moral foundations. God has made it so. God has made the universe to be based on a moral law. So long as man disobeys it, he is revolting against God. That's what we need in the world today, people who will stand for right and goodness. Most people can't stand up for their convictions because the majority of people might not be doing it. See, everybody's not doing it, so it must be wrong. And since everybody's doing it, it must be right. But I'm here to say to you this morning that some things are right and some things are wrong, eternally so. Absolutely so. It's wrong to hate. And it's wrong to hate from either side. It's wrong for white people to hate black people, for example. He was talking about that. But you know what else he was saying? It's equally wrong for black people to hate white people. That's why he led a peace movement, a nonviolent peace movement. He believed that there's a moral agency in human beings, and if we could spark that moral agency, they'll give up. They'll give civil rights and respect to people. Right? He believed that. And he accomplished it, didn't he? He accomplished it non-violently. He said it's wrong to hate. It always has been wrong and always will be wrong. It's wrong in America. It's wrong in Germany. It's wrong in Russia. It's wrong in China. It was wrong in 2000 BC, and it's wrong in 1954 AD. It always has been wrong and always will be wrong. It's wrong to throw our lives away in riotous living. It's wrong to just lead a life succumbing to temptation. No matter if everybody in Detroit is doing it, it's wrong. It will always be wrong. And it always has been wrong. It's wrong in every age, and it's wrong in every nation. Some things are right and some things are wrong. No matter if everybody's doing the contrary, some things in this universe are absolute. The God of the universe has made it so, and so long as we adopt this relative attitude toward right and wrong, we're revolting against the very laws of God himself. And he's talking to his church congregations and the people in his particular group. What's the road to happiness? This is back to divine principle. What's the road to happiness? All roads need laws, right? If you don't have laws on any kind of road, if you're driving down the street and nobody obeys the speed limit, nobody obeys the stop signs, nobody obeys the pedestrian, you're going to have chaos, right? The road to happiness has to follow laws. What are those laws? Number one, the first law to attain happiness as taught by the divine principle is individual spiritual growth, which means our knowledge of and obedience to God's purpose of creation. What Reverend Moon came to teach us in the 21st century isn't the law of gravity, but it's why there is a law of gravity. He came to teach us God's purpose of creation. What are we here for? What will really lead you to complete happiness? Mind. The first thing you know about life is you have a mind, right? Before you know anything else, when you wake up in the morning, before you know if your foot's still there or your hand still works, or if you had a stroke in the middle of the night, the first thing you know is you're conscious. Isn't that so? That's the first knowledge we have, consciousness. And next is free will. You have the ability to look around and see where you're at. You have the ability to get up or not get up. You have the ability to turn off the alarm clock or not. You have free will. And this is really important because this free will is autonomy and it's responsibility. And we have to align this free will with God's purpose of creation to become finally happy, right? He says, and we have intellect. Intellect is the ability to know right from wrong. Not just scientific facts, but if you're going to be happy, you have to be moral. If you're going to be moral, you have to know what's right and what's wrong. And what Reverend Moon has been teaching us, we have to know what's right and wrong based upon God's purpose of creation. Not just right and wrong, turn left here, turn right, but based on God's purpose of creation. We know we also have fallen nature. That is a predilection of temptation to do the wrong thing. Even we know what's right, we still sometimes are tempted to do what's wrong. Right? Yeah, unfortunately. That's why this free will is so important, and that's why knowledge is so important. That's why will to do good is so important, that we understand how to become owners of our own body. So we say childhood, babyhood, toddlerhood, adolescence, to teenage years, this is your preparation time. That's our preparation time. For all the young people in the room, this is your preparation time. It's really important that you use this time wisely. That the young people of our church, the young people of our nation, are taught to use this time wisely to develop ourselves. Our parents in our church, we teach our parents to shower our babies with love, right? Hold them, kiss them, love them, play with them, teach them, do all kinds of things with them, right? This is really important that children receive love, and it's also important that our children receive truth, right? Because this is the foundation for eternal happiness, this family love bond. We say the maturity of intellect, emotions, and freedom of will, those things, the ability to overcome selfishness and self-centeredness, that's the foundation for happiness. If you don't become an owner of those kinds of things, you can't ever really be happy. We have to develop our willpower in order to overcome temptations and overcome, most importantly, self-centeredness, or you won't be happy. You can't be moral if you're self-centered, right? And that's a foundation for men and women to find happiness in this universe. That is the internal, invisible law for the foundation of your ultimate and eternal happiness. Just like if we don't know the formula for gravity, we can't ever get a satellite in space or enjoy GPS. Reverend Moon says if we don't understand and employ the purpose of creation, we'll never really be able to find happiness on earth or into the spiritual world. So yeah, we need security, and what Reverend Moon has been teaching us all this time Yeah, we need security of the body, of employment, of resources. So not only do we need individuals, we need families, we need many families, and that's where the term tribal Messiah comes. In order for you to become secure, right, if for children to become secure, they need mom and dad. For mom and dad to become secure, you need a community. That's our church community that you attend all the time. It's also your tribe as we expand that out. Those are all important elements. But what Reverend Moon taught us is you absolutely need to have a nation that protects you. Even you individually could be strong, but if your nation goes to war or somebody attacks your nation, who's going to protect you then? So Reverend Moon taught us we need a nation we call our Cheonggyeolguk nation. That's what we're working for. That's what we're living for, to accomplish this. The world, and then we need to go to the world. That's why the unification of world Christianity, to protect you, and that is why we were founded as a Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity. That's what we're trying to accomplish. That's what we're teaching about. That's what we should be doing every day of our life, trying to make this important. Remember, Unification Church was founded in 1954 because Reverend Moon had lived through World War II, lived through the annexation of his home country by Japan, suffered so much, and then lived through the civil war of communism because of all that suffering. He came to understand there's really only one way to find happiness, and it takes this long-term goal to be able to finally achieve happiness in this world, and the next. Amen? Amen. God bless you. Thank you for listening. I hope that was at least a little bit interesting to you. And thank you very much.